Good morning, everyone. Good morning, everyone. I'd like to call to order the budget work session. Today is August 10th, 2021, and the time is 2:10 a.m. And Ms. Johnson, do you want to tee up the presentations? Or do we just go straight down the list?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. Good morning. Yes, we're just going to follow the agenda as laid out. So if you're ready, we can proceed with the first item, which is a presentation and update on the capital improvement program that's going to be led by our Director of Engineering Services, Kevin Volbridge.
Very good.
Good morning, Mayor, Commissioners.
Good morning.
I'm going to go ahead and go through our capital improvements plan for fiscal 22. My outline is going to be an overview of the current fiscal year CIP, as well as talk about what we're planning on doing next year. The overall program that we have for our CIP goes through 2025 with about 213 planned projects with a total value of about $305 million. The current fiscal 21 budget contains CIP funding totaling about $192.3 million. It's made up of about 9 different funds: gas tax, our capital acquisition fund, public works bond, there's some public utilities bond money, there's some money in fire assessment for capital, the parks bonds of $28.2 million, sales tax about $29.3, and in the CRA bond, the 38.8 is the portion of it that the engineering department is managing for the CRA. And then we had about $874,000 of grant money from fiscal 21. There are approximately 29 projects that will be completed or have been completed in fiscal 21, and those total about $30.2 million in value. To highlight those, the first of those is going to be the Martin Luther King Memorial refurbishment. We expect that project's going to be finished probably by the end of this month. That had a total value of about $376,000. The Pleasant City Community Center is a expansion and a renovation of the community center to facilitate the parks programs that will be held there. That was part of the sales tax program that funded this project. It was about $1.5 million, and we expect that to be completed by the end of September this year. The South Olive Tennis Center is another new project. This picture here is actually, well, it's still under construction, but we just received the certificate of occupancy on this building today, and we expect to turn this over to the Parks Department at the end of this week. And the total cost in this was about $2.1 million. Also, the Centennial Fountain refurbishment, that included refurbishment and replacement of all the pumps and the plumbing, as well as the high-tech lighting and audio system that made this really a really cool feature for downtown there. Also, something that we did was that on Tamarin Avenue, we did some safety improvements, basically to enhance. This basically goes from Fern to Banyan Street. This is an aerial view, obviously, and we provided enhanced pedestrian facilities with new crosswalks, pavement markings. We put some median islands in there. We put controlled turn movements on off of the side streets so that it would be much more pedestrian friendly. And I can personally attest that it is a lot safer to cross that street from the train station than it was previously. Also, another project that we did was we did some stabilization of the shoreline at Lake Mangonia on the east side of the shoreline there. This had to be coordinated with all of the residents that lived there because we basically were working right in their backyards, as you can see. And we had to stabilize the shoreline with some textile reinforcing material, as well as stabilization rock on some of the sections of it. And this is basically to mitigate any kinds of erosions that were occurring from the tidal wave action where the canal goes in and out of this Lake Mangonia. Also, we completed the third phase of the Clematis Streetscape project. This picture here is looking at the intersection of Rosemary and Clematis and looking up at the 600 block. And then this is a view of the 500 block looking east, and you can see that it's very nice, and it's a very pleasant experience to walk down that way. Also, one of the more famous projects we did this year was our South Olive traffic calming. We provided speed humps and signage, as well as ADA crosswalk improvements and bicycle lanes on South Olive. Interestingly enough, this project seemed to spur several requests from residents and neighborhoods for traffic calming that will be reviewed for potential implementations. Also, one of the less glamorous projects was we did some tidal valves. Our first phase of that was 4 pilot tidal valves to see how they would work. We did these at 4 different outfalls between Southern and Greenwood along Flagler there, and found out that they do operate properly, and we're going to continue with the phase 2 of that this coming year. This is a list of those projects that were completed in fiscal 21 by Commission District. I won't necessarily go through all of them individually, but if you have any questions about those, I would certainly be happy to answer those if you'd like. And just the various ones that you'll see here. So the revenue sources for fiscal 22 for next year, we anticipate we will receive about $7 million in sales tax revenue. That's based on what we've received so far this year, and is pretty much in line with what we'd received in previous years when last year obviously was an anomaly, and so we expect to get at least $7 million this year. But that's already allocated towards the 14 established projects in the sales tax program. And then there's some unallocated new revenue. We're estimating conservatively we're going to get about $1.6 million in gas tax that we can put towards roadway improvements. Hopefully it'll be a little bit more than that. And then there's some carry forward from the capital fund reserves of $123,000. And then, of course, there's grants and from the state and the feds that we're hoping to secure. We've been working a lot on trying to apply for those and see if we can get money to help fund some of the infrastructure needs that we have in our capital program. And then next year, we expect to complete another 54 projects, total about $60 million. And those are also listed here by Commission District. Just a couple highlights. This includes the HCD Resource Center, which is getting ready to get started on the construction of it. A number of the work that's in the park bonds. There's going to be some lighting improvements up in the area of 25th to 27th, between South Street and Rosemary, and a number of utility projects. We hope to get the road work at the first section, part of the work at Roosevelt Estates done, and also some other lighting improvements on Division, just north of Banyan, between 3rd and Palm Beach Lakes. We expect to do some re-roofing of fire stations number 7 and number 2. And some other further park bond projects, as well as a number of lift stations that are going to get refurbishments all throughout the city. There's a number of projects that have been requested that we currently haven't identified funding for. Those total about $65 million, and those are made up of the various departments. The support services wants to repave some areas at the city complex and replace some AC units here at City Hall. That total is about $1 million. The library wants to replace the carpeting for about $375,000. There's at least 4 transportation projects that we need to get funding for eventually. 49th Street, 25th Street, the Carver Avenue area, and then Village Boulevard, we're looking at doing that in about 3 phases. Overall, that would be repaving, expanding the median island, putting some trails on there. We're hoping to be able to go after some grant money to be able to do that work. And then Public Works has a couple of items that they wanted to do with putting some new storage racks in one of their buildings, as well as modifying or upgrading the restrooms in their admin facility. And then the police department still has some requests that have been in for a couple years. This does not include vehicles. And you can see what those are, the incident command vehicles, bomb suits, the evidence destruction trailer. And then also, I wanted to put on here the seawall repairs, replacements. We estimated overall from the assessment we did back in 2018, the total cost of doing that would be about $49.3 million. And we're also looking at trying to get some grant money to help us move forward with some of that work as well. And the way that you can look and check on the CIP program is to go to the city website, go to the WPB.org, go to the government tab, engineering tab, and the CIP GIS tab that's underneath that. It'll take you to this page. You can click on what project you want to look at, and it will give you the details of that with the description, the budget, the status of it, etc. With that, I'll leave it for your questions if you have any.
Thank you, Kevin, for this presentation. And this is a question for the city attorney. It looks like we may be getting some monies out of Washington for infrastructure projects. Are we doing some preliminary analysis so that we can hit the ground running once, hopefully, that bill will be signed in the next month or so? You probably don't know the answer to that, but could you check?
I don't, but I'll have that
Thomas,
answer for you shortly after the meeting.
And, you know, I just want to be able to take advantage of those opportunities as soon as we can, as soon as those monies become available. So if we could do some legwork now, so that when the monies do come down the pike, we'll be ready. Yes, Mr.
Mayor,
Farmer.
I could, go ahead, Amanda. I was about to say I can speak to that. We have been.
Okay, fine. That's
Yeah,
great.
we have had departments,
Okay.
to identify potentially eligible projects. So I think we are teed up and ready to go if
Excellent.
those funders were to come down the pike.
Excellent.
Yes, Armando Fana, Assistant City Administrator. And in addition to that, we have staff that are looking at getting studies in place so we can have some design work done so that when these opportunities come, we have at least preliminary designs in place.
Excellent. Excellent. Okay. Commissioners, questions? Commissioner Warren.
I have several questions.
That's
Okay. When we look at the slide where you spoke about when you spoke about the road improvements and the $1.6 million that's allocated for that, what is that based on? Is that based off of feedback? Do we have a plan for road repairs where we've noticed the potholes and Village Boulevard? Yes.
Yes, I'm sorry for interrupting, but these projects are unfunded, so no money, and Kevin, you correct my understanding, no money has been allocated. Those are unfunded, and we need to identify funding sources.
That's correct.
So funding has not been allocated. That's just the projected cost.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, so when we identify that there are issues that will require funding, then we bring those forward, and then how is that addressed?
Well, yes, I mean, there's a number of things that we need to provide money for that will be hopefully happening in the next 4 to 5 years. We're looking at potentially maybe going after some grants for those things, or as our revenues come in for the capital program, we will try to allocate money to be able to fund some of those things. But right now, we haven't identified where we're going to pay for those things.
Okay, and because I wasn't a member of this body, when the pipes, those historic pipes, when we began to see some of those issues, where is that located in the budget and our planning?
You talking about with the tidal valves?
The pipes that,
stormwater pipes. That's probably utility, right?
Some of that is included in our program right now. There's $66 million worth of utility funds, utility bonds that are in the program right now. It's about $21 million of stormwater, and the balance of that is for water and sewer.
Thank you.
I think the commissioner wanted to know where could she find or where could we find a description of those projects? Is that something that would be,
Yeah, I could provide that for you. I mean, I was showing the things that we were going to be, we were completing this year and also for next year.
understand.
The other ones are ongoing. I could, in the CIP website, there's a description of all of those projects that we have underway that includes all the stormwater projects that are going on.
but when you get a chance, you might want to share that information with all the commissioners,
Okay?
so they at least have it available to them?
Okay.
Okay.
One more.
Oh, you have, no, take your time, take your time.
Our water systems, where are we looking at the funding to support the infrastructure and the changes that we may anticipate to ensure that we have the safe drinking water supply? Is that under capital improvements?
No, actually, the capital improvement program is for all of the distribution and transmission of the water system. The treatment of the water and all of those things are covered directly by Utilities Department.
So that'll be coming forward. Will that be discussed this morning?
I'll let Armando get into any further details, but when we look at, treatment and making certain that we have safe water, I mean, that's something that we're doing ongoing. If you put it in the context of the panel that the mayor has put together, they are charged with identifying any best practices that are out there that we're not following, any type of operational changes that we need to make, and then what those recommendations would look like. And then we would look at how we would implement them. But
And the scope of their review was limited to protection from algae. In fact, they're not looking at the whole water system, but they're honing in on the algae infestation and how do we become more resilient, right? I mean, that was their scope.
Yes, Mayor, that
yes,
that's
but I
correct.
want to underscore that on a daily basis, we are taking action and have procedures in place to make certain that the water is safe.
Absolutely.
So that's not something we're waiting, in terms of funding that will make that happen. So I just want to underscore that point. But go right ahead.
Yeah, no, and I wanted to point out to Commissioner Warren, because she wasn't on the commission, we made a large investment, capital investment for UV, our UV system, which was just put online, I believe it was 2 years ago, which is has a major impact on trying to improve the water quality. And there's consistent upgrades that are being made. For example, there's filters that are changed every 5 years or so, 5 to 7 years, that are very expensive. So all those things are online to be replaced when their time is up.
Thank you.
Follow up? Okay, Commissioner Schoaf?
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Kevin, for the presentation. Especially, we have a lot of requests at this time during budgeting from residents because we're looking a lot at the operational budget, and a lot of their requests are capital. So I appreciate you putting up the capital website because we direct them to see if their projects are already online. My question is, if neighbors or others identify a project, in District 1, we hear a lot about the redoing of North Flagler Drive, various neighborhood improvements, et cetera. How does something make it to a list? Can you talk about the process? Because I know some of these things we've approved, but they remain unfunded. So can we talk about the process of how something makes it to the capital improvement list?
Well, it starts with the departments themselves, where they would put the request in, they'd identify what projects they want to do. As far as utilities go, they do a condition assessment and they evaluate what the priorities are on the infrastructure that's currently in place. And they have a program if they need to do an R&R on the existing infrastructure, that, they add money to that and provide for additional projects every year to do a continual infrastructure upgrade at the various locations where the need's the greatest. As far as the transportation projects go, we have identified a number of areas that need to have certain safety improvements. Sometimes requests from residents end up becoming a new project that would be requested by the department. And that would be from our department in many cases when it involves transportation improvements. And, I think that Most of those items mostly would be in the utilities or the transportation area that would be requested by the residents, and that's how those would get addressed.
So if a resident had a request, the best thing would be to reach out to your department.
Yes.
Okay, and then that would be put onto a list, and there would be there's various sources of funding, and there's various, if it's roadways or whatever the infrastructure is throughout the city, sometimes it's county involved, sometimes it's state involved, et cetera. So on this list, we have a number of unfunded projects, and I guess the follow-up to that is whether it's not American Rescue Plan, the infrastructure bill potentially coming down the line, or other sources of funding. How are priorities set on what projects get funded? And then tangential to that, if we're anticipating money coming down on infrastructure bills, will qualifying projects be taken from this list of unfunded, or are we looking at the whole of maybe things that aren't identified yet that are not on the unfunded list but needed?
So, Commissioner, I just want to clarify something because a issue is brought forth by a resident, it may or may not get on here. It depends on the prioritization, and sometimes it'll be a cosmetic thing that's really just not going to hit the top of the priority list. So I just wanted to clarify that, because a lot of times residents will come with an issue that for them is a priority, but it's not, because it's cosmetic. So I want to make that clear. In terms of prioritizing the American Rescue Funds or other grant funds, that's something we would discuss internally in terms of priority. One thing Kevin touched upon, but didn't go into details. We are looking at assessments. Like we have the pavement assessment. The utilities department, as he mentioned, does assessments. There's a lighting assessment that's been done. Those need to be updated every few years. That's really where we get more data in terms of what becomes a priority and what isn't. And that's where then we look at where the funding would go, is those priority areas where there's some data to support it, or there's obviously a health, life, safety issue. Those will be addressed first as well. So, it goes in the priority of life, health, and safety. Then if there's some measure that we have data on, we can prioritize that way. And then, of course, administration and you all ultimately vote on where the funds go based on those priority needs that are provided.
Thank you. I think as we look down the road, we're looking at a number of projects that folks have been waiting on for a long time, especially out into our neighborhoods. So I just want to make sure, as we have funding come available, we consider this, not disregarding the fact that some other hot priority may have come up in the meantime that needs to be looked at as well. Just want to make sure those who have been patiently waiting in line to have their needs addressed have that fair shot to do so. Thank you.
And I just want to add a footnote to Armando's clarification, because as you develop the CIP program, it is not typically resident-driven from the aspect that residents can call up the engineering services director, and identify their needs. Typically, how that plan is developed, is what the director indicated. The departments, are abreast of needs out in the community, as are the commissioners. So we try to bring that input together, and then through this budget process, the board, based on staff recommendations and the input from the board, then determines what projects are going to be put into the plan. So I want to manage the expectations in terms of residents, so that we don't inadvertently create a perception that they can pick up the phone and call the engineering director with legitimate needs, and it's going to show up, on a list. So I just want to make that clarification clear.
Certainly, Administrator, and thank you for that clarification. I understand it's a difficult job. There's always going to be more needs than there are resources. I guess my question out of this is, resident-driven requests come to myself, and I know my colleagues, the mayor, et cetera, and those needs may be, what is imperative to me may not be a priority compared to looking at the whole picture, which, you as administration only have the whole purview. So if I have residents that are looking to have something either looked at, addressed, et cetera, what is the best way to get that into administration, and just to at least have it be noticed, communicate back with the resident, or it either turns into a priority where it's something that we look at and we say, oh yes, this is a high life safety issue that we weren't aware of that needs to go on a list, or we say, look, this is a need that's in our needs assessment, a level 5, and we have level 1s that we have to address first. So what's the best avenue into administration? How should we direct constituents?
Well, I think the pause on my part is directing constituents. I think that needs to come from the constituents to their district commissioner, and then it's brought up at either board comments and then folded into a work session, or is sent to administration via an email, and we have that further discussion with the mayor and get direction on including it in a proposed plan or recommendation. But it needs to come from the district commissioners, listening to constituents and their issues, and then filtered to administration either through email directly or through your comments in city commission meetings or in work sessions or through the budget development process. I think there are a number of avenues. There's not just one way that a commissioner can bring forward projects that they have been requested from their constituents to consider.
Okay, understood. Thanks.
Commissioner Lambert.
Thank you, and thank you for the presentation. I think it was great to see a very high-level overview of the projects that have been completed, as well as what we have in the pipeline. I was excited to hear the tidal valves demo or the pilot program went very well. I didn't see, and maybe I missed it, you mentioned that that pilot then led us to expanding that. Is that in the plans for the upcoming projects, or was that already funded?
No, there is funding for that, and we have a program. We've got about 30-plus locations of other outfalls that we're going to work on putting tidal valves into those as well. I believe there might be a upcoming workshop where we're going to talk about storm drainage and tidal valve program, and I think that's coming up at some time in the near future.
Excellent, thank you. I have two other questions,
Yeah,
Mayor.
sure.
Thank you. Kevin, you gave us a month or two ago an update on the sales tax funding, and I know that there were some items that I was hoping to see completed with that funding that's not included in this project. Are we going to have an update to that funding source specifically?
Well, some of these projects are funded by the sales tax program, like, for instance, the Pleasant City Community Center. At some point in the future, if you'd like me to give you another update on the sales tax, I could certainly do that.
Well, I recall there were a few projects that weren't going to be completed, like the South Dixie project, and that we were looking at how are we going to utilize those funds. So I guess I'd just like an update on that.
Yes, Commissioner, we'll be getting with you specifically on that project soon. But yes, there is going to be some repurposing of some of the funds specifically on South Dixie.
Okay, thank you. And then my last question, similar to Commissioner Schoaf, I'm curious, have we ever looked at our sidewalks as a whole throughout the city? I know that a few years ago, we had some funding that went to repairing sidewalks, but I know that in a number of our neighborhoods, there's no sidewalks at all, or there's sidewalks for a little bit and then they end, and there, as I go through these neighborhoods, I see people just walking in the street, and I really appreciate that our priority is life, health, and safety, and I would think that sidewalks fall within that.
Well, there's a combination of things there. Obviously, there's Public Works is involved in repairing sidewalks that may have damage to them, but there's also an ADA transition plan that's currently in the works that we're developing that's going to identify the areas of the city where the existing sidewalks, or non-existing sidewalks and the curb ramps and everything like that, all need to be upgraded eventually to meet with the current ADA requirements and regulations. And so that particular transition plan is been drafted, and we're hoping to be able to finalize that at some point here in the very near future. And I imagine that's probably going to need to come to the commission for an approval. So we are working on that.
I'm curious if you know off the top of your head, what's our deadline for that? Is there a federal deadline?
No, the reason, the more of a sense of urgency on it is because for some of our grant-funded projects, they want us to have that in place.
Thank you.
Commissioner Warren? Well, let me see. Did you have any questions, Mr. President? No. Okay, we'll go back around.
Hi, when you showed the slide that showed the police department and a $750,000 vehicle need.
Yeah, you were just on it.
22.
Yeah, that's the
Police
slide.
department, yes.
Is that separate from the vehicles that we've already, that has already come before this body? And can you explain a little bit more about what this?
I believe that's going to be funded separately. That's why I omitted it from this. It used to be included in this capital request, but I believe there's, the funding for the vehicles for the police department is being addressed separately from this.
That is correct.
That's one of those big
The incident
fancy.
command vehicle is another request at them. That's like a big bus that they use if there's an incident or something like that, you know, for the command staff.
Right, this would not fall in the category of the vehicles that are used by the officers and the staff. This is a special type of vehicle that Chief Adderley has indicated, you know, is a need for the department, but it is separate and apart from the vehicles that they use, you know, for every day on the job.
And in many cases, these types of vehicles, grant funds are what PD or fire will go after to try to acquire them, because as you can see, they're very expensive, but a lot of times they do qualify for grant funds.
Okay, any other questions of Mr. Volbrecht on this item? One. Okay, thank you for that presentation. We'll now move on to the fire assessment fee update.
Mayor, if I could, I would like to tee this up. I want
Okay.
to just note that unfortunately, our budget supervisor, Cal Roberts, you know, has taken under the weather, so he's not going to be able to join the presentation this morning. And Ms. McDermott, the budget manager, is going to pitch hit on both. The two items that are going to be presented, first starting out with an update on the use of the FY21 fire assessment fees. Now, this item relates specifically, Mayor, to the follow-up from the August 4th presentation. We handed out a hard copy that sort of laid out all of the expenditures, and you asked that we bring that back. So that's what this is in terms of that update. And then we're going to move on to an overview of the proposed FY22 Fire Assessment Fund budget. The overview has been presented at one point, but we wanted to bring that back so that if the board want to get into any level of detail about those particular uses before we get to the preliminary budget, this would be an opportunity to do that. And I also want to note that what the board will see from this point moving forward as it relates to the fire assessment fee budget, the proposed uses, we will have the identified letter in the ordinance that provides for the legal permissibility use of the funds for that particular category. And we're going to continue to do that based on the continuing misinformation that is out in the public realm. So with that, I'll turn it over to Ms. McDermott.
Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Okay, so our fire assessment fee fund, again, provides us a lot of services, and you've seen this before. This is here just for reference. I'll move on so we can get to the numbers, okay? There are the uses again, and we're going to identify exactly by the letter as we get further on to show you what we spent the money on. Just a reference, our revenue is provided by this breakdown of the adopted rates. And here's our third quarter revenue review. So year-to-date, we've collected $7,825,888. That's just a slight bit more than we budgeted. That includes interest that we take in for the money as well. So in our third quarter, this is what we spend the money on. So if you look on the left, we've identified the letter that corresponds to the ordinance of permissible uses. So the personnel services, as the budget allows us to pay for 14 positions, and that includes 9 firefighters and 5 support staff. So the total personnel that we spent in the third quarter is $292,768. That's your middle column. I'm sorry. Year-to-date.
That is correct.
Yes,
That's
I'm
the-
sorry. That's the third quarter. And then the year-to-date is the $922,668. So the materials and services that we have spent is $571,205. Further on, I'm going to let you see what those purposes were for, what we used it for. And then internal service fund charges are for our IT and support for $53,000. So moving on, we wanted to show you that when we budget, we have various needs that we project where the dollars are going to be spent. So the carry forward is something that is beyond the dollars that we take in for the assessment. And that is where we're allowed to bring forward funds for the projects that are already underway or going to be underway. So we brought forward for various repairs to the stations and maintenance and obligated leases a small amount, and we used $33,880 of that. The other things that are ongoing and going to be procured are for the exhaust ventilation systems throughout the stations and fire stations 5, 4, and 8. And then we have reserved for future projects. So basically, for this year, those were our expenditures. And any questions?
Linda, will you go back a slide so that, if the board has questions about the expenditures
Okay.
to date, we'll have that slide in front of them?
Yes.
Commissioner Schoaf and Commissioner Lambert.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you for the presentation. My question is on the $650,000 that's the capital outlay fund for a training facility. That training facility is also budgeted in the penny sales tax, is it not?
Yes.
And so why are we putting budget from the fire assessment fee to that as well? Have we determined that costs will exceed the penny sales tax collection?
There's not enough in the penny sales tax for what their needs are, and it is allowed because it is a joint facility for police and fire. So in order to build to, so we can get to building that, we have to set aside the funds to get there.
Okay. And maybe I can follow up with Kevin on this, with that assessment. In that project, I didn't think we were as far down to know what the total budget would be. And maybe I'll just, Administrator, if we could check on the status of that project to see if that's going to be, a need. And certainly, if we need more funds to support that facility, happy to support that endeavor. I think, too, it goes to the point that we've discussed about getting the master plan and a 5-year plan, and I think that will probably bring more light into where we are year over year. So if this isn't used, because I don't anticipate by the end of the fiscal year we'll be at that construction in place, so will this will then roll over and be part of the $3.6 million future reserve projects as well?
That's, yes,
yeah.
typically how it would work. And Commissioner Schoaf, you actually took the comments that I was going to make. That is the money that is being built on account for the training facility. That is part of what the board will look at when we get to the fall strategic planning session about the fire assessment fee funds, because there may be changes in terms of the vision and how it's going to be funded, but that is exactly part of the discussion that will be brought to strategic planning.
Great, thank you.
Commissioner Lambert.
Thank you. My question is along the lines of the reserve for future projects on the next slide. So has any of that been slotted for any projects, or is that part of that strategic planning process that we'll be discussing, that fund?
It's basically part of strategic planning. However, when we build this fund, as well as any others, we have a replacement guide that is provided by Fleet that stretches out 5 and 10 years. We already have slotted what we already know we need in the fire trucks. And for the next year budget and the following, that is a lot of the guide. Of course, it can change. You know, I'm just letting you know those things that are needed that you can make decisions on.
And as a footnote to that, Commissioner Lambert, when we get to the next part of the presentation on the proposed FY22, you're going to see where a portion, if not all of that $3.6 million is proposed. And again, you know, that can be changed, but that's where you would see that dialed into the proposed budget.
Great, thank you.
Another change that you'll see in the next quarterly update, we just put through a resolution that allowed us to use some of the reserves for the uniforms for 37 firefighters and an operating vehicle, but that will be into the next quarter. So we're just showing you up to June 30th quarter.
Any other questions on this part of Ms. McDermott? Yes, Ms. Schoaf, Commissioner Schoaf.
Thank you, Mayor. Just to clarify too, and this may come in the next portion, because we previously talked about what was committed to in the acceptance of the fire fee, which was the vehicle and the staffing of the vehicles. So if we have a $3.6 million reserve, will some of that be used to fulfill those commitments? Is that something that we're going to talk about here, or is for a later part of this conversation?
It certainly could be part of the discussion when we get to the FY22 proposed budget. I think you have two things that the board will have to sort of vet through here on the use of that $3.6 million. You have replacement vehicles that are dialed into the vehicle replacement plan for fire. And then you have that additional truck that was tied to additional firefighters that were not put into the budget. So the board will have to look at both aspects and determine, you know, feedback on what direction we're going to go with the use of those funds.
So that direction will come. We're going to have that discussion, the $3.6 million rollover plus the addition of next year's revenue and what the uses would be of those.
As part of the FY22 proposed, yes.
Thank you.
Any other questions on this portion? Yes, Ms. Warren, Commissioner Warren.
I'd just like to hear from Chief Maddie. Chief, did you participate in this this information, and do you agree with everything that's been presented?
Good morning.
Good morning.
Yes, I've been involved in the back and forth between.
You can speak a little bit closer to the mic,
sorry.
Chief. Thank you.
Just trying to be COVID safe. Good morning. Yes, I did participate. We've been back and forth on what our plans were. Some of the stuff is already built in, like the leases and the debt services, where, you know, that's kind of set up and established over time. But some of these other things, like the exhaust systems and what the repairs are that we have planned, we have to prioritize. If the AC goes out, that trumps everything. You know, we live in South Florida, so that takes place of, you know, a lot of other priorities. So as we go back and forth throughout the year, we brought that issue forward about a month and a half ago, where we got some additional turnout gear and a replacement battalion chief vehicle. So, you know, it's a fluid process as we go through it, so.
Okay, so are you satisfied with the information that's been presented as it relates to the fire assessment fee?
It's accurate. I mean, and that's what we've been doing for the, you know, it reflects accurately what we've been doing, yes.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome.
Well, let me make a footnote to the question. So I think the question, you know, would be better placed if there is any concern on the board's part or a single commissioner's part about whether or not the chief, you know, as a matter of course, you know, is involved in how the fire assessment fee recommendations are brought to the board. And I can assure you, as the city administrator, that I do that as a matter of course. When you look at what is before the board right now, this is the FY21 budget that was already set, and we're at the tail end of the FY21 budget. We're in August. We have one more month left in the fiscal year. Last year, through very, very concerted efforts and work session, the chief was pulled to the table in those work sessions so that I could be assured that from the ground up, as I was getting up to speed on the fire assessment fee, the uses, the history, the chief was joined at the hip with me. So there is no intimation to be made about the chief's role in developing the budget, because the chief is the fire chief, and we're talking about fire assessment funds. So I don't sit as the city administrator and just overlay what I think the use of the funds should be. The budget process is from the ground up. Now, I do look at that overall, and then to make certain that what is put in the budget is financially feasible and that it lines up with direction or discussion coming from the board.
All right, any other questions on this portion of the presentation? Thank you, Chief. Is Ms. McDermott, so she's handling?
Yes, I'm going to move on to the next one. So no, this is the FY22 proposed budget, and I do sit with Diana Matty and her staff, the fire chief, and we build based on the needs of the fire station and what we can put into the fire assessment fee. So I'll move along. Here's the history that, of course, you know, we established the annual recurring fire assessment special assessment fee, and it excludes the EMS. Again, there's your different purpose areas of use of funds, and we'll identify them again later. This is the special assessment. We illustrate that it is for essential services and capital needs for the fire department. Special assessments are not property taxes. It is an assessment that allows the use of funds to specifically use just for that purpose. An example of another assessment would be stormwater. So just to differentiate that when you get a tax bill, an assessment is not a property tax. And there are the proposed rates. There's no change in the 22 rates over the 21. So the revenue budget for fire assessment, the proposed budget, the revenues are built on the assessment fees, which is $7,708,500, and we get interest on those funds for a total of $7,762,200. That $7 million is what we build the operating budget on. The carry forward are those projects that we identified. So in the proposed budget, again, we have the personnel, which is the 14 positions, the same as 21. The materials and services are for things such as repair and maintenance of the stations, repair and maintenance of the fire trucks, doors, window, minor equipment, fire foam, I'm going by memory, and other miscellaneous uses. The internal service fund charges are for IT, computer uses, and insurances. The intergovernmental transfers, we'll show you that a little later, what the uses of those are for. When we have to buy capital, we have to transfer those funds to a capital fund, and that's basically what that is. The intergovernmental transfers for capital is the vehicle replacement for that 366,203. And then you have your roof repair, doors, and a replacement for Station 2. Those are the expenditures. So the operating expenses, there's the personnel lineup. We also have uniform and bunker gear for 37 firefighters, and the internal service funds and insurances. Continuing our operating expenses, we have the contracts for the stations and the apparatus maintenance. That includes inspections for all kinds of equipment, your stoves, any kind of thing, equipment, your generators, all of that. We pay for the electric and the water for the 9 stations, and again, fire station building repairs as well as truck repairs. The fleet equipment maintenance charges support gas, diesel, chemicals, and of course you know that that price is going up. The operating expenses are their supplies, PPE, minor equipment, their water tanks that you see on them, all kinds of minor equipment. Okay, so our prior year debt payments for capital leases, we have a lease for the aerial ladder truck replacement, and that's coming out of the FY22. That's an additional lease that we're adding to the previous, as well as 3 pumper truck replacements. So now that's coming from the new money of the fire assessment fee fund, that $7 million that I spoke of. In capital outlay, we're allowed different vehicle replacements. The vehicle replacement list includes the 2 replacements that are needed for an F-250, a replacement for a 15-passenger cargo van for training, the replacement for an extended cab, and then a Tahoe, and the various fire suppression utility and cargo trailers. That is built from the fleet replacement list that the fire department as well as fleet management recognize as necessary to replace, and many of these, the expense of their maintenance has gone up, and that's how they determine priority. And I will take any questions on the budget.
Okay, any questions on the proposed budget for the fire system? Commissioner Schoaf.
Thank you, Mayor. And thank you for this. On the 22 capital outlay, all the vehicles that you've laid out here, is that part of the $3.4 million capital outlay that was in the budget line item?
No. The, let's see. The 3 vehicles at the top, the 2 and the 1, are new money. When I say new money, that's not rollover money. That is part of the plan of replacement that would have occurred in 22 that we need. The others are replacements of and they need to be, the funds need to be carried forward, or we would not have sufficient dollars to be able to do that.
So can you back up for me in your budget line items? So here in the intergovernmental transfers for debt services, this $3.4 million is different than the $3.6 million that was future reserve projects, correct?
That's correct.
Okay, so can you tell me in what you've presented here, what accounts for the $3.4 million? And then I think we were accounting for the $3.6 million in there somewhere too. So can you identify it?
Sure. The 3.4 is, there are several years still of capital leases for some of the buildings, and the majority are for fire trucks, but we still have a little bit for the buildings. And this goes back a few years, so we're paying principal and interest as you go along. So each year, if we add a few leases of vehicles, that's going to add to the debt. So this is the accumulation of debt in the last few years that we're paying principal and interest, like you would a mortgage or your car payment.
So, and I think a lot of these things may be answered as we go forward in looking at an overall plan. One of the things that the fire fee was supposed to address was that it is supposed to provide incremental fire capacity for residents. And when we take something and we go back where there was originally a plan, so we're talking about leases that have had a plan for a number of years, and it's only been over the last several years that the fire assessment fee has been increased. So at the time we went under these leases, we had a plan to finance them. And so then when the fire assessment fee increased, we transferred those debts into the fire assessment fee, which, I think becomes a slippery slope of providing incremental services. If we're just transferring debt from one account to another, that's not providing incremental services, that's financing what we've already committed to. I realize that that line has to be drawn somewhere, and there are times, as in budget years of last year, that we have to kind of make sure that we are fulfilling all of our needs. But $3.4 million of a transfer of debt is a large portion of the fire assessment fee that was supposed to be for incremental services, additional services. So as we go forward, I want to make sure that we're not just taking commitments that we've already made, be it for financing of fire stations or financing of equipment, and just transferring it to this fee. The fee is intended to provide additional services.
I don't want to jump ahead of you. Don't lose your train of thought, but we need to make certain that we are very clear here. So as it relates to debt, if we were to roll back the ordinance under one of the categories, it specifies as a permissible use any financing that is approved by the board. So when the board approved a letter of credit to finance needs for the fire department, then that becomes a debt service payment related to the fire assessment fund. What you see in terms of the transfer is just taking the money out of the fire assessment fund and transferring it to a different fund, but it's not as if we're taking debt service payments that was, let's say, theoretically intended for the general fund, and we're transferring it to the fire assessment fund. This is purely an accounting move here in terms of how we account for the debt service payment related to the capital leases, related to the financing that the board approved to buy the various equipments or make the various construction of facilities. So I just want to make it clear that it's not transferring debt service payment from a general fund financing that the board approved, and we're transferring it into the fire assessment fund. I just want to make certain that we're clear on that.
So thank you, Administrator, and let me clarify on that project. There's no argument from my side that it's a permissible use, 100%. What I thought I heard was we had leases that we had gotten into in previous years. I understand from an accounting standpoint, it just needs to be paid. It's similar to transferring from your savings to your checking so that you can pay out of your checking account. But what I thought I heard was these were leases that we had previously gotten into prior to fire assessment fee being implemented. So for instance, we built Fire Station 4 before the increase in the fire assessment fee. And at that time, we would have had a finance fee that did not involve a financing strategy that did not involve the fire assessment fee because the funds did not exist. And so what I thought I heard was something like that, whether it's Fire Station 4 or leases for vehicles, previous commitments that are now being paid out of the fire assessment fee, which is a permissible use. But I guess from the standpoint of what we have promised to the citizens, what we had promised to the citizens was incremental uses. So am I understanding correctly that these are new leases that would provide incremental services and are not managing the debt service that was previously committed to under another fund?
Okay, good point. So the question then becomes, prior to 2008, when the fire assessment fee was enacted, was there debt service that was approved through financing by the board that we're carrying debt on now that is built into that debt service?
No.
So this debt service relates to financing or leases that have been approved since the enactment of the fire assessment fee in 2008.
Yes.
If I may clarify, Administrator, I'm not going back to 2008 when the fee was implemented, speaking more into the present when we doubled the fire assessment fee from $25 and to $50, and then from $50 to $100 is more the time frame that I'm speaking of. So we had a base level from 2008 up until 2017. I may have the year wrong. 2017, when we made the first increase to the fire assessment fee. When we made the first increase to the fire assessment fee, the commitment was to provide incremental services. So I think it's that 2017 mark to present day. To your same question, is this financing debt that was incurred prior to 2017?
It is not. If I can, okay. What occurred here, when we went to the $50, when we bumped it up, we recognized that we needed additional fire trucks, that we can get them by leasing instead of making outright purchases. So previous finance director said we need money to be able to do these leases. When you enter into a lease, you make the payments almost a year later. So we were able to allow the fire assessment fee to budget, so that way when these new lease payments came in, we could pay them. We would not have been able to get those replacement vehicles had we not increased the fire assessment fee. So then when we increased the fire assessment fee again, we were able to put into the capital vehicle replacement for those scheduled trucks. So all of that you're seeing, this $3 million, is occurring after the 217. It was actually after 218 because those payments did not fall into. And it was only because we were able to get the increase in the fee that we were able to get these fire trucks. Had we not gotten an increase in the fee, we would have had to go out for another loan or a bond for capital.
Thank you.
So the new trucks were, in effect, incremental improvements
Yes.
to the service we were providing to our citizens.
Yes.
Okay. Any other questions on this portion of the presentation? Okay. Thank you very much, Ms. McDermott.
Okay.
All right. Item 3, presentation proposed fiscal year 22 general fund balance budget.
All right.
Okay, Ms. Johnson, you're doing this?
Oh, okay. Oh,
Let me
okay.
pull up. Yeah, that's mine.
That's yours?
Yes. Yes. No, you're good. Thank you. I'm going to say good morning again,
Good morning.
Mayor, Commissioners, staff, members of the public that's watching the session. For the record, Faye Johnson, City Administrator. And I want to make a couple of comments before I start the presentation. And I'm going to do an overview, and Ms. McDermott will come behind me and then go into some of the details. My opening comments relate to something that I've said to the commissioners a couple of times verbally, and I have said to the staff verbally, and have put in writing to the commissioners as well as the staff. And the statement is specifically this: you know, given what we had to deal with to balance the FY21 budget and what the prospect was related to FY22, you know, I made the continuing statement that the FY22 general fund budget was going to be as challenging as FY21, if not more challenging. And that I hope I was wrong in making that prediction. And I stand here before you to say, I am fortunate that I was wrong, that we are not in a more challenging situation for FY22 than we were in for FY21 in terms of balancing the general fund budget. And I think that's a great thing, and I don't want that to be lost on the commission, because I have said that to you all several times and tried to prepare you that FY22 was going to be as challenging, if not more challenging, than what we went through for FY21. And I always try to footnote that with saying, I hope that I am wrong. And now I want to say I'm glad that I was wrong in terms of that prediction. And there are three particular things that causes us to not be in an equally challenging or more challenging position as we look at FY22. And I don't want those three factors to be lost on the board. One big one is that our local economy rebounded better than we projected as we were going through last year. You know, it was just really a scary situation in terms of what was happening with loss of revenues that helped to fund the general fund outside of property taxes, whether or not the economy would come back and we would start seeing the increases in the revenue streams where we lost the 7.7 million, but due to, in part, the great job that we have done with keeping the city moving forward. We know that the property values came out in a very good place. We know that we generated a very high interest in new development here in the city, and that has helped to keep us probably on a better track with revenues than what we projected. So that's one of the key factors. The second key factor is that we are seeing decreases in some of the operating expenditures. And I want to underscore that because one of the things that you all have heard me say, and I know probably ad nauseum and sounding like a broken record, and that is that historically we have been in this structural imbalance where our ongoing operating expenditures were outpacing our ongoing operating revenue. And until we get to that point where the operating expenses were in line, if not lower than the operating revenue, we were always going to be in a budget reduction mode. And having taken the drastic actions that we took as part of the budget development process for FY21, and now seeing those decreases, we are beginning to change that historical imbalance within the budget, and I don't want that to be lost on the board. The third key factor, and I have highlighted this, but again, it's critically important from my perspective, and that is that as part of balancing for FY21, we dealt with this monster from my perspective. Let me correct that, the noose around the budgeting here in the city with this vacancy allowance, that $4.1 million. So as we talk about how that was a noose around the budgeting here in the city, it's important that the board understands the detrimental impact of that type of budgeting on the general fund. When you take appropriated positions that the board has approved and you reduce that total general fund budget by $4.1 million on the hope that positions would not be filled and allow for $4.1 million of additional expenses that theoretically you can't afford, we have been historically building our budget by $4.1 million of really unaffordable expenses on the hope that the positions would not be filled. And I would hope that way past my tenure as your city administrator, that this city would not engage in that kind of budgeting practice because it is a noose around your budgeting for your general fund. It puts you in a posture where every year you are starting out the gate with a $4 million deficit that you have to deal with. And so we don't want to be in that kind of situation. So I wanted to underscore that before I give you the overview here of where we were when we did the presentation on August 4th to where we are today, and then Ms. McDermott will put more meat on the bones. So when we look at August 4th, I did an overview of the general fund budget outlook to today's overview, which is the general fund balanced budget development. So back on August 4th, looking at the budget outlook, we were looking at the base operating revenues of about 10.7 million. That revenue picture has certainly improved, where we got an additional $1 million of revenue, and Ms. McDermott will go into the details now of 11.7 million. The property tax that is set still at the 5.3 million. And when we look at all of the other sources that feed into the general fund revenue stream, we were looking at 5.4 million of other sources. We have picked up an additional $1 million of revenue there. So it brings it, in terms of the balanced budget development process that we're looking at, we've gone now from a budget outlook of 10.7 million to balanced budget development of 11.7 million in general fund revenue for FY22. I also talked to the board about the outlook on the operating expenditure, the increases. And this picture goes to the point of our operating expenditures being under our operating revenue. So when we look at where we were back at the budget outlook, that was 14.2 million. And looking now at the reductions that we are now seeing in the various line items, we have brought that down to 7.7 million. And again, we'll get into more of the details. So when we look at by category of how we break out our expenditures, the market mandates the outlook was 1.5 million. As we looked at tightening of the numbers and the reductions, that's now 1.3 million. A big one in terms of the personnel expenses, from 3.2 million down to 1.3 million. And then on the step pay, COLA and VIBO, you see that actually increased slightly from what was presented with the budget outlook to now what is included in the balanced budget development. For the police and fire market adjustment, that's indicated in terms of the increase, 900,000, and I want to pause to explain that. The market adjustment for police and fire, what's dialed into the budget is a total of 6.4 million. That 6.4 million includes what we have already executed by way of the 3-year contract with police, and then what we have dialed into based on the tentative agreement with fire, which has not yet been executed. But when you take that 6.4 million for the market adjustment, we use the overtime from the two public safety budgets to fund the market adjustment. So that 4.9 backs that out. There was 2.7 million in overtime for fire, 2.2 million for police. So when you balance those two, you get to really a bottom line increase of about 900,000 of increases for FY22, and that's the 7.7 million. And my numbers, are estimate because I deal with it at the high level in terms of the presentation to the board. So what does that do for where we are now? When you look at the net revenues that we are building the FY22 proposed budget on, that's 11.7 million. And you look at our operating expenditures increase of about 7.7 million. So we are 4 million to the good in terms of revenue. And being at that place, I think it's great news that as we look at developing the budget, all of the departments had to submit a 5% budget reduction for the general fund. And that was from the mayor's budget, including the city commission budget, and all of the general fund departments, with the exception of police and fire, who did not have to reduce their general fund budget by 5%. given that we are $4 million to the good, all of the budget reductions that were submitted are in the budget. So none of those reductions will have to be taken. So the commission budgets has been completely restored. The internal auditor's budget has been completely restored at the FY21 level. The mayor's budget has been restored. The department budgets have been restored. So the vacant positions that you all put on the table of having to be cut, the various material and services that we were gonna cut, which included things like cleaning for the library, that was part of their 5% reduction. And we need to keep the library clean. Mowing of mediums, that was part of reductions in Parks and Rec. So that money has been restored. So as we stand right now, we are in a position that we did not imagine we would be in, where departments are not having to take the 5% reduction because our revenues for this year outpace our expenses. And I would submit to you that we want to the extent that we can, continue on this path so that we can get out of this budget reduction every year, putting the organization in a tailspin of what we can cut. But that depends, on a number of things as we move forward, depending on how the board wants to grow the expenditures here within the city. But we're there for this year, and that's very good news. So I also presented back on August 4th some pending threshold issues, and given the positive revenue situation that we're in, we have made adjustments here. That's part of the proposed FY22 budget. So the outstanding union contracts with PMSA and SEIU, the 3-year contract that we negotiated with them, it included an opener on the compensation. In FY21, the 3% is in the budget. The opener allowed for us to come back to the table to negotiate for FY22 and FY23. We propose for PMSA and SEIU a 5% cost of living adjustment for 22 and 23. PMSA accepted that, and we have reached a tentative agreement with them, which I think is good news. So that's dialed into the proposed budget. SEIU did not accept that. So there is no money for a cost of living adjustment for employees that are in SEIU. With the police captains, given the timing at which they were authorized to unionize, they have now selected the who's going to represent them, which is FOP. So with the police captains, it's more of a timing issue. We have not yet started negotiations. I anticipate, just from a timing and planning standpoint, that cost of living adjustments or whatever comes out of negotiations with the police captains, that would be addressed in the FY23 budget. And unfortunately for SEIU, given the various numbers of categories of employees that fall into SEIU, they are not going to see a cost of living adjustment for FY22. Moving on, when we look at vehicle replacement and purchases, 1.3 million that is in the proposed budget, and that goes in part to the presentation that you heard from our support services director about the vehicle needs and pre-funding. That does not address theoretically any of the 10 million that were listed in that we're hoping at some point we'll get to a discussion about the American Rescue Funds and using a portion of the reimbursement of the lost revenue. But the 1.3 million is an effort to start doing pre-funding and putting that on account, on a schedule, so that we don't find ourselves in a situation where all at one time we have critical vehicle replacement needs of 10+ million of dollars. Another pending threshold issues that we've now been able to address was police and fire overtime. Taking that 2.2 and 2.7 million out of their budgets to help fund the market adjustment left the unanswered question of how or what level of overtime we're going to fund. So we're taking about 2.7 million. I think it's 1.7 million is in police budget for overtime and $1 million for fire. And so we know we're going to have to carefully monitor how that overtime is expended because it's a much reduced amount than the 2.2 million and the 2.7. So that's just the total of the two. And then one of the other pending threshold issues was COLAs. What are we going to do for our group of employees that are not within a union? And these are the group of employees who did not get a salary increase or cost of living adjustment for this year. For FY22, what is dialed into the proposed budget for the confidential classification of employees, a 3% cost of living adjustment, same for management 2, same for management 1. That's dialed into the proposed budget. So by way of a ledger, the green check marks indicate it is included in the proposed budget that you're going to get an overview of from your budget manager, and the X's represent that it's not included in the proposed budget. I do want to footnote for the board that because of the inequity or the parity issue that is being created between confidential employees and employees within SEIU, we have an overlap of about 3 positions where you have employees, administrative assistants specifically, that are sitting side by side to their colleagues. They're sitting side by side. One is in SEIU, got the 3% this year, and then the other one is confidential and did not get it. So we have a built-in sort of parity issue. I am continuing to look at the FY21 budget to see if there are areas that money has not been spent, to have that discussion with the mayor and hopefully to get support to come back to the board, and although it will be at the tail end of this fiscal year, to see if we can then give the 3% to employees who are in that confidential classification. And I think there's about 55 employees that fall into that. And one of the sacrifices will continue to be that management 1 and 2, we're not in a position to try to restore or to give a retroactive 3% for this year, but looking forward to FY22, it is dialed into the proposed budget. But I'm really concerned about confidential, because had SEIU accepted the 5%, then you can see how that inequity will continue to increase between employees in SEIU and confidential that are sitting side by side doing the very same job. And so we want to just be very mindful of that and try to rectify it or minimize it as much as we can. So as we look at what we did for FY21, you certainly adopted a balanced budget of $193.45 million rounded for talking purposes. What is proposed before you today is a balanced budget for FY22 of $204.1 million. And with that, I will turn it over to Ms. McDermott, pausing to see if there are board questions and discussions before we move into more of the details of what's in the proposed FY22 budget.
Before you sit down, Ms. Johnson, go back to slide 6, please. Let me just publicly commend you and your team for getting us to this point. Clearly, when we embarked upon this budget process, I don't think any of us saw us being in this position that we are now. So I know it took a lot of creativity, a lot of hard work, but you know, and board commissioners, I hope you recognize a couple of things. One is the contracts that the one we've executed with the police, and certainly the one we have tentatively agreed to with the fire union, are historic in terms of the raises that were given, particularly to the rank and file. The agreement we have with PMSA, a 5% increase, they've never had that before. Another historic contract. And you see the list of other hurdles that we had to overcome, or Ms. Johnson and her team had to overcome to get us to this point today, making some headway with other employees, finding a way to fund some extraordinarily high overtime and starting to set some money aside for vehicle replacement. So we are in a much, much better place than we had anticipated being, and certainly a much better place than we were a year ago this time. So kudos to you, Ms. Johnson, to your team for sharpening the pencil, getting us to where we are today. This is fantastic news. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor, and I promise that I'm going to scale back my speech about the budget. I'm not going to do it every day, maybe just once a week.
I think we have a couple. Commissioner Warren.
I would like to say thank you very much for your transparency. I know that it may be awkward to speak on inefficiencies that may have been identified, but it's very important that we speak to those inefficiencies in order to rebuild confidence and trust from our public, and confidence from a body that votes on the information that is presented. I think this transparency puts us in the best possible position to ensure that we meet our fiduciary responsibility to our residents and our staff. And I think that it also, we have to look at the level of accountability that this brings forward for us to help move our city forward and in the right direction. When I look at this slide, I am interested in knowing when we come to a decision for SEIU, and I know that I'm hoping that this can be considered, that they may be able to look at a retroactive cost of living increase, and that we can also look at the non-union employees. And I'm happy that you've made the point about them being considered, because they are all employees of our city. And I think that there's a large portion that is unrepresented, and there's also a large portion that is in SEIU, and that those are the pay grades that are among the lowest pay grades in our city. So I'd just like to make sure that we strongly consider this slide.
We certainly will. And Commissioner Warren, you're correct in terms of some of the classifications within SEIU and being within the lower pay rung of the city's pay scale. And that in part is what pains me, that we couldn't get to a tentative agreement on a historic offer that was put on the table. But be it as it may, we will continue to make an effort to reach a tentative agreement on the last year of their contract, which will be in FY23. I will tell you that, I don't envision moving into FY23 that whatever tentative agreement we're able to come to with SEIU, that I would be in a position to support retroactive back to FY22. That is not money we're dialed into the budget, and we are going to be cautiously optimistic that in FY23 we will still be in the position that we're in, where expenditures are under our revenues. But it's going to be a heavy lift to consider retroactive to FY22, when in fact, they had the very same opportunity that PMSA, to recognize what the city was putting on the table and determine whether or not it was beneficial for their members to accept it, and they made a different determination.
Commissioner Schoaf.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Administrator Johnson. Just one point that I want to touch on, to the point of the confidential employees that did not receive the cost of living increase in FY21. Thank you for looking at that. I think that was one of the hardest decisions in the FY21 budget. And so I am 110% supportive of going back and taking a look and seeing how we can make those employees whole. And I thank you very much for taking a look at that.
Thank you. We'll do so.
Commissioner Lambert.
Thank you, Ms. Johnson, for you and your team and for the hard work that went into pulling this together. And I'm glad to hear that your projection was wrong this time. So thank you for that. Can you remind us what would be next steps with SEIU and their negotiation process as to where we are right now?
We're going to continue, to meet with them, but from a timing standpoint, we're in August. I mean, we're at the final throes of adoption of this budget. So August 23rd, the board will hear the presentation on the preliminary budget, and I anticipate that it's going to line up with what you are being presented here today on the proposed, but it's going to go into a lot of the details. So from a timing standpoint, I'm anticipating that whatever agreement we come to with SEIU, we will dial it into the FY23 budget. But for support from the board that we then want to take, some of the reductions that departments made in terms of submitting their budgets that we put back into the budget, that we then make those cuts to create, additional room to then be able to absorb that. And as we speak, that's not a position that I support, but I certainly, defer that to the discussion that comes from the dais. That's a policy call, not an administrative call.
Thank you. And on the previous slide to this one, I believe, if you don't mind, the $4 million just difference here, that has yet to be budgeted, is that correct?
No, that is in the proposed budget. So part of that 4 million would be like the 2.7 million in the increase for overtime. You'll see some of it in for contingency. We've not had a contingency budget. We cut that out. What you see in terms of vehicle replacement, so you will see where those increases based on the additional revenue over expenditures is already dialed into the proposed budget, which goes to my comments about negotiations with SEIU and the police captains for different reasons, now looking to be dialed into the FY23 budget because that additional revenue has already been dialed into the proposed FY22 budget.
I see, thank you. And do you recall offhand if SEIU and police captains, I'm not even sure if we were that far with the police captains, had accepted the city's last offer, what that total amount would be to impact our budget?
The police captains, there has not been an offer because of a timing issue. They have just selected FOP to represent them. So we have not even sat at the table to begin negotiations. So there's clearly a timing issue from when they were unionized. With SEIU, I don't recall that dollar amount off the top of my head, but I can easily get that for you because we did calculate what that 5% equates to that was not accepted.
Thank you.
Any other questions of Ms. Johnson before we get to Ms. McDermott? Okay, thank you again, Ms. Johnson.
Thank you.
Hello, Linda McDermott, Budget Manager. And I just wanted to comment that the SIU impact is estimated at about $450,000 for their 5%. I just go to sleep with these figures.
Say that, 150,000?
No wonder-
450. 450.
Oh, okay, I was about to say, that sounds very low.
Oh, no.
All righty.
No wonder you and Ms. Johnson get along so well. Sleeping with the budget book.
Mayor, I can retract my comments and mention the budget every day to you as opposed to once a week.
Never mind. Okay, all right.
All right, I'm just
I'll back off.
clarification.
I think I know this budget better than my own checkbook at this time. Okay. I can't find mine.
Did you save it on the desktop?
Yeah. I have the PowerPoint. This should be it. Yeah. There we go. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, so this is going to be the FY22 proposed general fund budget. So our general fund revenues, our property taxes are 95 million, which is fantastic. It's over $5 million more than the prior year. Licenses and permits is 15 million. Intergovernmental, that is where our state revenue sharing is, our local half-cent tax, and other taxes that came in a little higher than we anticipated for our benefit. Charges for services are a multitude of things throughout the city that we charge for, and we get funding from other funds into ours. This just shows you the total, which mirrors to what Ms. Johnson provided for the operating budget of $204,101,168, and I'm going to go forward to show you what these numbers really include. So property taxes increased 5.3 million, and within the charges for services, that includes other fund administrative fees. What we mean by that is the utilities pays back to the general fund for certain services such as finance. The CRA also pays for services. The reason the other funds administrative fees went down is we have various cost allocations that go on for the different departments, and it depends on the projects for the year and the cost of services, and that will make the change in what administrative fees we collect. Emergency medical services went down about 900,000. What that is the fire department, their transport. The state provides revenues, and in the last few years, we were one of the first departments to take advantage of the additional revenue that came to municipalities. Well, as the other governments caught on, the more governments that apply for the revenue sharing, the lower our portion gets. So that's why there was a reduction. Commercial garbage, they are, again, with great new buildings and what have you, that's going to mean more commercial garbage. So they've had no fee increases. This is just collecting more than we did the prior year, and that's about 400,000. Planning and zoning, they're up about 100,000, or yeah. Recreation programs are down just a little. As you know, there's been construction going on to a couple of the rec centers, and plus the attendance is a little lower with the COVID. So we did adjust this for taking into consideration both, and hopefully by next year we can recover that. So the intergovernmental increased about 2.4 million, and this is where the state revenue sharing, which we get from the state a long list of little amounts from different incremental payments, and this is our municipal share of that. Local government half-cent sales tax, people are spending money again. It came back better than I had anticipated. And of course, when we do estimated early budgets, we're never going to budget high for certain things. This was probably the hardest year because we didn't know of the recovery early on when we were starting the budget process. Now in July, the end of July, we got our numbers from the state, and this is the reflective number, so these are good numbers. So our licenses and permits, the FPL franchise fees went up 1.4 million. Again, we estimated very low because it was a big variance, and then they had a jump in fees, and to our benefit. Other taxes increased 2.6 million, and that includes utility taxes from electricity, water, and gas, and then we have your business taxes that are coming in at 1 million. We always do so much better than we ever anticipate with that. That's very great speaking for us. Fines and forfeitures, that's your lien collections, and that is basically like your code enforcement. We have alarms, but basically that revenue is this. You know, you have some traffic tickets in there, but that's very minimal in this total. Transfers that increase, we have grant funds that offset some, like in finance, if I'm going to do some work on a grant, that grant pays administrative fees. It pays back the general fund for services, and that's what that is, basically. Public utilities, we have police officers who secure the water catchment area, and the utilities department pays us back for that. So now here are the expenditures, and again, I'll go down that. That is going to mirror your amount of revenue, because we're presenting to you the expenditures and revenues on a balanced basis. Changes can still be made before we do the adopted budget. So our personal services increased by 6.3 million. And as Ms. Johnson illustrated, the things that I'm just highlighting the major changes, which is police and fire market increase. Now, the fire is the proposed, okay, and that is not final yet, but that includes just the amount that was calculated for the proposed. The 3% COLA for civilian non-bargaining at this point is all except for SEIU. The PMSA, when they bargained, they got the 3% COLA and the additional 2%. So I just reflected the 268 because when I originally did this, it was based on the 3%. So I just added that too. The public safety overtime was reduced by the 2.7 million. That's police and fire. The police holiday pay increased by 300,000. What had happened is in the prior year, it was actually, the budget was a little lower than what it should have been, plus now with their increases, that increases the cost of holiday pay as well. The retirement reduced for police and fire, and this was a significant decrease, but you're only going to see 150,000 net because the decrease was great. What they did is the actuary report comes to us, and they have a new way of calculating. I guess they extend the life expectancy, they do new calculations. So this was a very good year for them to do this because it really helped us out. Otherwise, our increase to both police and fire would have been about 700,000 had they not done that. And then we added the Juneteenth holiday. The impact of that is about 77,000, and that's for our first responders and those people who have to be here on a holiday to keep your services going. And then the fire bargaining special pay. The fire department has special pays for a paramedic on top of their salaries. They have various special pays. This is just showing you the impact of any salary increases also increases the special pay. And then, of course, all those other benefits that go along with, Medicare retirements for civilians, that was $633,000. Okay, so in employee health benefits, that's $1.3 million. But this year, we had enough available reserves in our health fund. So we were able to reduce by $739,000. And what it also allowed us to do is we did not share any increases with the employees. The employees will not take any part of the increase, and we were able to absorb it because we had significant amount of fund balance. OPEB is other employee benefits, and these are for retirees, the benefits that we have to pay. We also had a fund balance for that. So we were able to reduce our contribution requirement for this year by $601,000. Our workers' comp is one area that went up significantly this year, $972,000. So then we come to materials and services. That increased $1.1 million. And that includes, we have a lot more voting by mail. And that also got more people to vote. And it's actually more efficient. Yes, it's costing us $96,000. However, it's reaching the public, and I think that's well spent. Economic development is very big. That increased $410,000. And we have now brought back an economic development budget, basically. Last year, we had to really pare down a lot of cuts. And this was one area that this year, we have a lot of commitments to restore things in our community for equity and inclusion, and then the mayor spoke very well on our Bloomberg task force on this. A lot of good things coming, a lot of good initiatives that are going to help businesses and the community. Engineering consultants, we restored $100,000 for contractual services. We had to cut that completely out last year in order for Kevin to complete his projects. He has to look to outside consultants, so that was restored. Sanitation dumpsters and compactors. The reason that went up so much is Josh McDermott advised, they got notice the steel increased a great amount, the cost of steel, and plus just getting the compactors alone, the cost of that went up. So we did not get any last year, so not only did we get new ones, but the cost went up like about 40%.
Hold on just a minute. We have a question, Ms. McDermott.
Yes.
Thank you, Ms. McDermott. Do you mind expanding a little bit on the workers' comp increase?
Sure. Let me see if Hosea is here. Okay, no problem. What happens is it's based on the claims that come in. Sometimes there may be a claim that may be a few years old that happens to fall in a certain year, okay? So when we build the, oh, you are? No. I'm sorry. I'd love for you to come up here.
Good morning, Mayor, Commissioners.
Good morning.
For the record, Jose Luis Rodriguez, Chief Human Resources Officer. The proposed budget for the workers' compensation and the general liability claims is based on past trends and projected future trends. However, that the reason why that fluctuates, and for example, why you saw an item yesterday trying to transfer more funds into those line items, is because you really can't predict with any reasonable amount of certainty how many injury or liability issues there's going to be within the fiscal year. And even though we have instituted a very robust safety program in the city that has reduced all of our recordable injuries, you still have the issue that just like you can't predict the amount of injuries, you can't predict, you may only get one this year, but it may be a very costly case. So that we do our best estimates to try to get to a reasonable amount so that we're not going back to the commission to transfer funds or to find funds from another area, but it's not a perfect formula.
Sure. Well, I appreciate that, and I understand unexpected circumstances, but I'm grateful to hear that there is a safety program in place to reduce these types of claims, and I just wanted to make sure that we were giving sufficient attention to that.
Yes, and there's also been a couple of things over the past couple of years that have increased workers' compensation claims costs to employers. For example, when post-traumatic stress was added as a coverable type of injury for first responders, that has also led to more cases being filed, because now you can file for PTSD injuries as a workers' compensation compensable claim, and those also tend to be, depending on how severe the diagnosis is, also tend to be costly.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Commissioner Warren?
Yeah, 972,000 is a huge variance above a budgeted amount. And I can appreciate the safe work environment that we ensure. Could any of this be attributed to an unnecessary risk due to insufficient staffing?
No, we have just had injuries that have been higher cost, and a big driver, or not a big driver, but one of the major drivers is also these new claims that are by law have been added as now new types of claims that you can file for workers' compensation, and that is also driving those types of costs. And that was kind of predicted, I think, when the law was changed a couple years ago by the legislature. That was one of the things that local governments were concerned with, was the increase that it was going to have to workers' compensation related claims. But so we're trying to build that in as best we can.
Okay,
Okay,
thank you.
thank you. Okay, so for our police department, they added some canines. So with canines, we have to feed them, we have to give them vet care, and they have some training needs. So their budget increased a little bit for that. So the real-time crime center technology, the police department has a fantastic real-time crime center, and in the downtown area, the CRA is supporting $600,000 so they can add some cameras and the technology needed to enhance the security for the downtown. The police academy tuition is $40,000. That allows the police department to be assured of the commitment of the students who can come to fill the grant. We have a lot of vacancies. We really want to get the guys in. We've got the grant money. We need to get them on the streets. So in order to do that, the police academy tuition is about $4,000 each. So the police added 40 rental vehicles, and that's to the tune of $375,000. The rental vehicles allows us to get the vehicles on the street. As you know, with COVID, it's very hard to even get the vehicles. There's been a huge delay once you order them to get them in. Sometimes we have vehicle accidents that take a vehicle off the road. The rental, they did some research, and it ends up to be the most efficient and effective way to get those vehicles on the street. So the gasoline and diesel is no surprise, $288,000 that went up. Now, in our current budget, we had already bumped it up some, and then the gas went down a little. So the difference probably would have been about $400,000 had we not already set a higher rate there. And of course, the library cleaning for the carpets and the furniture and the ceiling of the floors, we brought that back at $20,000. The auditing, they do contract out a lot of services depending on the audits, and with all of these new wonderful grants that we get, you're committed to doing compliance audits. So we're giving them their $80,000, much needed. Now, the EMS Medical Director Services has been cut, and that's the $44,000. And if there's questions on that, I'll defer to Diana. The equipment maintenance is for not only vehicles, but generators, various equipment throughout the city. There's been a reduction in the cost of maintaining those. When you get new ones, you don't need it. Some of the use has gone down, or the uses may have changed, and also the allocation of the assets were rearranged, and some of the expenses went to other funds. So that allowed the general fund reduction. And then with some of our festivals, events, and promotional items, that's been reduced $31,000 because we've also reduced the number of events. And when COVID is over, they may ask for that money back. And then we have some minor equipment throughout the cost centers that the department's made some reductions on. So then with our debt services, that increased $166,000. Now, what this is, in 2016, we got a special obligation refunding bond. This is the first year that we got the principal, but that was done strategically because we knew we were having prior lease loans and bond payments dropping off. So you strategically do your financing so you don't get the big hit all at once. So the net is the 166. Transfer to other funds increased $2 million, and what that is, there was a change in what we have to transfer from the general fund to the waterfront fund to maintain the waterfront is a difference of $199. They had enough, again, in their reserve balance from leftover things that didn't occur last year to help with their budget. So we did not have to put in from the general fund. The COPS grant match and general fund share is $916,000. We're now into the second year of the 30 officers. So what happens is the share is going to increase from here on to the end. So this covers the additional match, and what the grant match doesn't cover, that's the total. The fire grant general fund share for theirs is only $26,000 because they were fortunate enough not to have a match. And this just pays for the little bit of special pays and things that the grant doesn't pay for. And then vehicle replacements, we're putting in the $1.3 million, which is just a very small portion of what we truly need, but and then reserve for contingency is $1 million. And that equals to only about 0.5% of your total budget. We wish that we could do more, but it's $1 million more than we had last year. So in personnel, what we added, we did not cut any positions, but we added 4 positions, support staff in the finance department, a senior budget analyst, an accounting supervisor, and then in fire department, a senior fiscal analyst to handle all of those additional grants that they have, and then Parks and Recs, a fiscal analyst. So I am extremely happy for these positions.
Can I have you pause right there? I want to
Yes.
just point out to the board, for the finance department, the accounting supervisor, and if I misstate this, please correct the record, is a position that is needed specifically related to the additional monitoring and tracking of the American Rescue Funds. But because we are not yet at the point of deciding that, and we've dialed it into the general fund budget, but if at the end of the day, the board does approve the funding of the position from those dollars, then that would free up that funding. But because there are reporting requirements that are already on, coming online, we have to make certain that we meet that requirement. So I didn't want to take that chance and have that unaddressed.
Okay, so this puts us to our next meetings, just their clarification. August 23rd is the preliminary FY22 presentation from 3 until 4:45, and then September 8th is the first public hearing to adopt a tentative budget and millage rate. That's at 5:01. And then September 23rd is our final public at 5:01. And I was remiss before I started, and I do want to recognize my staff, which is Rosanna Santana. Why don't you stand up and show it? And Joe Lamerson is back there. And my wonderful supervisor, Kyle, is under the weather today, otherwise he would have been here. And also, I want to tell you, the relationship with the department directors has been fantastic as we've gone back and forth, what to cut, what not to cut, who to keep, who not to keep. And I want to recognize those department heads who I've worked with for many years. And so, we are a team, and Ms. Johnson and I speak a lot to get through these cuts and with the department heads. So I was so happy to see this extra revenue come in. And when I was hit and put back this amount, it was wonderful. So made my department heads very happy.
Mayor, if I could just want to point out a couple other things to the board so that you all can keep this in perspective. The vote by mail, that 96,000, that was part of what the board approved to come out of discretionary unassigned fund balance. So you won't see a request like that moving forward because it's now in the operating budget. That was also the case with the police rental vehicles. If you recall, we got approval from the board from discretionary unassigned fund balance. That's now in the budget. And then I need to correct myself because I made a comment last night that we were building back the economic development budget. I thought it was 300,000, but your number reflects 410,000, which the board is probably pleased about that, but I thought it was 300,000.
It's because of the account numbers where things fall, and there are some things that are in Office of Equal Opportunity,
Okay.
But they're all, the base is for economic improvement, community initiatives, and development.
Okay, all righty, thank you.
You're welcome.
Ms. McDermott, before you sit down, let me publicly thank you as well for all of your hard work and effort to get us to this point. I know that you and Ms. Johnson are joined at the hip. You share certain reading habits, but that's good. It helps the
I was joined with Diana Mattis Hip when we did all the fire assessment too.
But I know it has not been easy, so thank you very much. Any questions, comments from the board? Okay, thank you again.
Thank you.
Anything else on the agenda, Ms. Johnson?
Now we can move on, Mayor, to item 4, which is Mayor's Matters, if there are any.
No, given the lateness of the hour, I don't have anything. Board members, do you have anything for the good of the order? Okay, hearing none, this meeting is adjourned. Thank you, everyone.